Welcome to Feature Fridays. My name is Guy Bartram. I'm the Director of Product Marketing for our cloud providers at VMware. And today I'm joined by Rohan and Jeff. Hey guys, thanks a lot for coming on board. Let's start with a quick round of introductions. So Rohan, why don't you go first?
Sounds good. Thank you, Guy, for inviting us. And my name is Rohan Mukesh. I'm a Senior Staff Solutions Architect, part of the Modern Applications Business Unit. I help the cloud providers in their journey of Kubernetes adoption. Excited to be here.
That's a big role. I mean, helping the cloud providers with Kubernetes adoption, there is so much demand for this. It's going crazy, in our portfolio kind of just shows how much this is being looked at from a product management perspective all the way through to kind of deployment. Thanks, Rohan. Jeff.
Hi, I'm Jeff Mace. I'm with the VCPP program. I'm part of the customer advocacy group here in VCPP, working with our engineering teams and with our providers about focusing on their adoption of our solutions and bringing some of their experiences and their recommendations back from the providers to the engineering teams to try to make sure those are incorporated into what we're releasing.
Excellent. All right. Thanks, Jeff. And equally a very important role, and we'll get to some questions. I'm going to quiz you on some questions that you might have seen from partners or customers today. So we're here to talk about Tanzu Mission Control. Tanzu Mission Control self-managed, right? This is something that was been in like a pilot phase, a limited availability phase for the last sort of 6 months or so, and is now going to be GA. This is a big deal because Tanzu Mission Control is kind of excellent for kind of Kubernetes management and has traditionally been a SaaS service. The main problem with that is obviously particularly in sovereign environments, right? You know, you can't use a SaaS solution. You can't come out of the jurisdiction. And we've done something pretty cool. We've listened to our providers ask about, you know, demand for sovereign, demand for innovation within their jurisdiction. And we've taken a SaaS platform, literally ripped out the SaaS guts of it and made it run on or in a service provider's data center as a self-managed solution. So Rohan, why don't we just kind of take us through some of the aspects of this solution that would be relevant for service providers?
Oh, yeah. And Guy, you were spot on around the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed, especially for the sovereign cloud service providers that we have. It's a big leap we as a company has taken from the SaaS version to the self-managed version. And what this slide really provides you an overview is the service provider journey for app modernization. And if you really see in the last 6 to 8 months in our service provider journey, we had CSE4, completely new architecture. Then we have CSE 4.1, which just came out last month. And now we are coming up with centralized management or a single glass of pane for our service providers using Tanzu Mission Control self-managed so that they can cater to not only the platform operators, but also the app operators and the development teams in their journey of Kubernetes. So it makes their experience so much richer and easier for them to consume Kubernetes, deploy the applications on the Kubernetes with different policies, and then they can do several different day-2 operations as well, which I'll go in a bit later. So that's the second aspect where you really see we are bringing the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed for our providers. It does also go into point 3, where you see the advanced Kubernetes infrastructure in terms of backup and restore. Tanzu Mission Control also provides that features and capability of doing a backup and restore of the Kubernetes clusters. Plus, at the same time, in terms of the security, you can do the security inspection of the clusters. So really, if you really see from the overall portfolio perspective on the VCPP side, we have grown heavily in the past 8 months, I would say, from CSE, then getting the data solutions as a part of the portfolio, and then bringing Tanzu Mission Control actually completes the part where we are really trying to manage the Kubernetes cluster. So that's the journey we want to reflect here for the cloud providers in terms of the app modernization.
And that's been a key ask from cloud providers, right? We started out with, hey, look, you can deploy Kubernetes with VCD. Kubernetes and Tanzu Kubernetes became a first-class citizen in VCD. CSE kind of carried on growing, but it was kind of almost growing as a separate extension to VCD. And then CSE 4.0 came up with a revamped architecture, much closer integration, much more focused on life cycle as well as deployment of Kubernetes clusters. And cloud providers need these management services, right? They can't just deploy without kind of providing the overlying management platform to control the instances and provide service levels based on that. So this is, I think, is there a, there's obviously a play for cloud providers using this, but there's also a play for customers to be able to use this as well, right? And sell this as a service to the customers.
Exactly. Exactly. And, that's the reason why we have now integrated Tanzu Mission Control with VCD, where not just the cloud providers can make use of it, but it's their tenants or the customers who can make use of it. If they want full control of all of the Kubernetes clusters and they want to manage the Kubernetes clusters for their app teams, it's them who can take care or to take control of all of the Kubernetes clusters by using the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed.
Right. And Jeff, in kind of your view, what have you seen from your customer or partner in this case conversations regarding how's Kubernetes going for them? Because I've certainly seen some differences in regional kind of adoption of Kubernetes, and really, I guess, the provider's ability to be ready to offer a service based on Kubernetes, based on the skills they have in-house and how they're delivering their services today. What's the evolution you've seen? Because obviously we've got a lot of innovation here. The portfolio has kind of just exploded in terms of capabilities and services that partners can offer. What have you been seeing in the field?
Well, I think they're hungry for these kinds of services because their customers are looking to deploy Kubernetes workloads to their environment, but they need that management expertise for assistance with the management on top of those clusters. And so the providers, they want to sell those Kubernetes workloads, but they also want to make sure that they bundle this management layer along with it. And so the providers are really hungry for TMC self-managed to be available for them. And with this GA, we're already talking to multiple providers that are excited to get this into production to support their existing Kubernetes as a service offering, or to really allow them to bring that Kubernetes as a service offering to their customers so that it's not just the infrastructure, but also the management that comes along with it, and giving their customers that full experience rather than just giving them a plain Kubernetes cluster that they would have to configure on their own.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And sorry, Rohan, go on.
Yeah, and on top of it, when I look into some of the pain points based on the discussions we had with the providers, like the pain points are wide. Let's say with CSE, they get the Kubernetes container as a service and they can offer that with their customers. But then the next question comes as, hey, now I have like 20 clusters or 30 clusters and so on, or 100 clusters. How do we make sure that we can uniformly apply policies to all of them? How do we make sure that we take care of backup and restore? In VCPP and VCD, we do have OSE, but then we think about OSE to do the backup and restore. Then the next question comes, how do we make sure that our clusters which are created through CSE are conformant to the Kubernetes standards, or can we run CIS benchmark? So like there are different pain points and challenges that they have thought about, and they have been asking questions around that. How can they work around this, or is there a product that can help us? And that's where Jeff points about they're hungry for this product to be made available to them. And and this is a huge moment for us that service providers are really going to like this.
Yep.
Yeah, it sounds like it's the keys to the castle, right? I mean, before you would have had to do a lot of kind of potentially manual work to ensure, like you said, like things like cluster configurations are all the same and security policies are correct. Now, we're going to be providing a solution for you to kind of make that a lot easier, a lot more operational, at a lower cost, which is going to obviously then, meet your bottom line requirements.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Okay,
And so,
so let's.
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, let's dive into it. Let's peel back the onion and see what's there. So we know Tanzu Mission Control is still a SaaS service, and this is the self-managed service. So this is very attuned to, well, not just sovereign use cases. I think it's pretty much, every kind of enterprise customer out there that's going to want, Kubernetes applications is going to need to have some sort of overlying management like this. But it's very relevant for sovereign because obviously disconnected from SaaS. So yeah, let's take us through, what does this disconnected offering look like?
Yeah, so in the disconnected offering, as you said, that it's very relevant for the sovereign cloud, and just keeping them into the mind and making sure that we bring Tanzu Mission Control as a part of the sovereign cloud portfolio. Now, what this is, the cloud builders can now offer Tanzu Mission Control to their tenants using this integration that is made available in September 27th, just last maybe a week or two. Now, in terms of the commercials, it will be available as a Flex add-on. It's GA now, and there will be an upgrade path for all of the future releases. In the product user guide, the work is being done to make it available in the product user guide for the providers as well. So that's kind of it. In terms of the sovereign cloud, we really wanted to get it available. It's GA'd, and there will be future upgrades, and there will be an upgrade path for the Tanzu Mission Control. It's not in the tech preview mode anymore. The providers can go and install it in production, and then it is going to come as a part of Flex add-on from the consumption basis, and yeah. So that's the focus of this particular slide. Now we do have, as you can see on the right hand side, that in terms of that there are two personas. One is a tenant, and then one is the provider. The provider is responsible to install Tanzu Mission Control self-managed, and once they do, then the tenant's responsibility would be to attach all of the Kubernetes clusters that they have into the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed. We do have another architecture slide where we will go and deep dive into how that high-level architecture looks like. But that's kind of a bottom of it, that how we are going to have the cloud providers make the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed available to their tenants.
Okay. And in this scenario, right, you've got VCD, you've got Container Service Extension 4.2, which is the requirement for this to work, right?
We'll go into the BOM, but then the requirement for this to work would be VCD 10.4.2, and then Container Service Extension 4.1, and optionally OSE 2.2.2. But Jeff would go over the prerequisites in the end.
Okay, cool. All right.
Yeah.
So this is so the OSE component is there so you can do Kubernetes-based backups to object storage.
Exactly. But that's in a way, I would like to just put it out there that it's optional. If a provider already has a OSE configured, it means that they do have the multi-tenant storage available. So they can hook that part to TMC so that from the centralized management plane in TMC, they can go into a cluster and say, hey, I want to do a backup and restore of that cluster. Now, that backup and restore would then be hooked up with OSE, and OSE where you can create the application key and you can create the storage accounts, and that's where the OSE will take care of the OSE will help in the backup. Now, it's not mandatory in the sense if I'm a provider and I already have a multi-tenant storage available to me, I can hook that up directly with the TMC.
Okay, got it. Right. Yeah. I mean, there is some nice things. We're having object storage and immutability, for example, which kind of, helps around ransomware and stuff like that. But that's a whole nother story. And just commercially, you said, right, so this is GA now. It's not in the product users guide yet. It will probably be in the next release because we're always kind of a quarter behind. So if a service provider is interested, right, they should reach out to their account rep who will be able to get the pricing to them.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Let's go to the next slide.
And the importance of the slide is to really hone in on the capabilities of Tanzu Mission Control. What you really get as a part of this integration is the identity and access management, which means that all of the users in VCT can be configured to access Tanzu Mission Control through the single sign-on. And there is a demo on this. Now, that's one of the most important capabilities. Like, let's say if I am the tenant and I am a user and I am already configured in VCD, I would like to access Tanzu Mission Control through the single sign-on that VCD provides, right? So that's first. Second, currently with CAC Kubernetes cluster, it allows you to attach and detach clusters. Once you have attached the cluster, then you will be able to perform all of the different operations that Tanzu Mission Control provides. In terms of the third capability, data protection, you can do the backup and restore. And then you can also look after the security and compliance when it comes to the checking of the Kubernetes cluster, whether it is conformant to the Kubernetes standards, or you want to run a CIS benchmark, Center for Internet Security, to really see how your cluster is and if there are any vulnerabilities in the cluster, and that report will actually tell you how you can fix those vulnerabilities as well. Now, one of the very popular capability of Tanzu Mission Control is the unified policy engine, where you get the ability to apply policies across a fleet of clusters. So let's say I have 100 clusters, I can group them into a logical construct called as cluster group, and then I can apply policies to the cluster group. What that will do is it will apply uniformly to across all of the fleet of clusters which are a part of that cluster group. So the nice thing about this is that it's a logical construct, and the name of that logical construct is cluster group. Now, that is really, really relevant for the platform operators in terms of the persona. Now, let's say, but what about the app operators? Like, so for example, if there are a cluster and that cluster is being shared across different teams, then those teams have their own namespaces. How does an app operator can make sure can they apply policies to the different namespaces uniformly instead of the clusters? And to answer to that is yes. And the way that is being done is using workspaces, which is also a logical construct. So workspaces groups the different namespaces. Once you have workspaces, you can uniformly apply policies to the workspaces as well. So, the point really here is that Tanzu Mission Control caters to both sides of the personas. If you are a platform admin or a platform operator, you can group different clusters into cluster group and uniformly apply policies. And then if I am an app operator or an app admin, I can group different namespaces into workspaces and then uniformly apply policies to the same as well. So we'll definitely deep dive into our demo when it comes down to policies. Now, in terms of the observability and diagnostics, the day two operations of Tanzu Mission Control really helps. So once Tanzu Mission Control gets deployed into the clusters, it does come up with Prometheus and Grafana so that the providers can look into how my TMC is really doing, what is the consumption and what is the metric. So that's kind of in a nutshell, the different capabilities that Tanzu Mission Control self-managed bring into the table for the cloud providers.
Very nice. Just on the identity and access management, that's not using local VCD users, is it? That's whatever IPAM is set up with VCD.
Great question. I will let Jeff answer that.
So that access management, it uses whatever VCD is configured to use. So if you do happen to be using local users, it will use local users, but hopefully you're using some other identity provider. We'll be showing an example with OAuth, where we've got an external OAuth IDP powering the tenant organization, but it will similarly work with LDAP and SAML integrations as well. And so it really offloads that identity management to VCD whatever VCD is doing for that organization, it passes that information to Tanzu Mission Control and enables those roles.
Great. And Rohan, have you done any kind of research into how a provider could potentially carve up the functionalities of Tanzu Mission Control self-managed into discrete services? Or at the moment, is it like, hey, look, we've got this control plane for Kubernetes that we could offer you could offer to your customers?
Right. We've done some research on and testing on how the primary features of Tanzu Mission Control can be split up using VCD roles or users. We do know that Tanzu Mission Control supports that more fine-grained policy management as well. And so you should be able to, and we can show this later, kind of set high-level roles or dive in and set privileges for that cluster group or for that workspace. And I think what the tenants will see is that out of the box, when each tenant accesses their Tanzu Mission Control self-managed environment for the first time, there's a default configuration using roles that are in VCD by default. But after that initial onboarding, they can implement their own roles and policies going forward.
Got it. Okay.
Exactly, yeah. And in the demo, you would definitely see that how the access policy capability of Tanzu Mission Control really helps, and how can we really go fine-grained. Like if I am the user of VMware, or maybe I am a user of a particular team, how do I get that fine-grained control in my Kubernetes cluster? If I'm a developer, what that would look like? Would it mean that I would only have an access view on the cluster? Or would it mean that, oh, I can only get an access to the namespace? And so these things can be configured at the user level, at the group level, at the service account level.
Awesome. Okay. That's good to know. So there's a bunch of capability here, which is great, number one, out of the box, but even better, integrated identity and access means that you're not having to kind of re-log in, which is fantastic. And then with that, you're getting some fine-grained kind of access permissions, which will allow service providers to carve up service parameters, let's say, for different customers.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's really customer driven. It's customer driven there. The service providers can help the customers implement their roles in VCD as they see fit, and then the customers are empowered to drive the rest of that policy management on their own. And so they've got that freedom to identify those different developer groups or operations groups and implement those policies as they see fit, and they without having to go to the provider, open a support ticket, or do something there. It's self-managed and driven by themselves.
Got it. Okay. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And from here, we can definitely talk about what are some of these. These are the capabilities, but let's get to the next slide where we have the advantages for the providers. Like, so in terms of the providers, we kind of talked about a bit in the previous couple of slides that it's a centralized Kubernetes management interface. They get the unified and centralized policy management. Now, the difference between the two is when they can now look into how is their Kubernetes estate, and they can get a full detail of their current Kubernetes cluster. So when you create a CSE cluster today, you don't get to see the nitty-gritty details of how your cluster is doing, what is the allocatable memory and what is the requested memory, allocatable CPU, requested CPU, how many number of namespaces are created, what are those namespaces, what workloads are running. That entire view is there in the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed. And so you can utilize it as a single glass of pane to get that view for all of the Kubernetes clusters. Once the clusters has been attached, then you can use the logical constructs like cluster group and workspaces to apply the policies. Then data protection and business continuity in terms of the backup and restore. And really, the disconnected mode is all about deploying it into the provider's solution landing zone which Jeff will talk about in a bit in the high level architecture, that what is that solution landing zone, where does it get installed, and how does the tenants make use of it. So it's a completely disconnected mode where they can get it installed in VCD. And then finally, it really caters to different personas. One, it can be platform operators, it can be app operators, it can be developers. So different personas can make use of Tanzu Mission Control to to ease things out in Kubernetes in terms of their application getting deployed, in terms of managing the entire infrastructure. So at the same time, what Tanzu Mission Control comes along with in itself is the Terraform provider for Tanzu Mission Control. So the platform operators can make use of the Terraform provider for Tanzu Mission Control and create the automation based on what they need. And secondly, in a lot of enterprise customers, they tend to use GitOps, and GitOps is a way to apply the configuration uniformly across different clusters, right? So one of the cloud native principle is to have environment parity when you go to dev, prod, and staging and those environments. So let's say if we think about different Kubernetes clusters, how do we make sure that all of the configurations in these clusters are uniformly applied? And for that, GitOps is a tool chain which is being used by several customers, and Tanzu Mission Control allows you to enable GitOps at the cluster group level. When you apply GitOps at the cluster group level, then you can have all of the configurations in a Git repository, and then those configurations will be uniformly applied to all of the clusters. So that's the consistency it provides for the DevOps team. And in terms of the consistency, ultimately what happens is the speed increases, right? Because in a very uniform fashion, these things gets deployed, the configuration gets deployed. So the providers or the administrators are not worried about that they have to manually go and apply these configurations to different clusters by themselves, which is error prone, and plus it is time taking. And that's what solves here as well.
This is so important for regulated industries and systems of like national importance with sovereign as well, to have that continuity, to have that knowledge that these systems that you're deploying have that consistency and are from a kind of stable goal build, if you like to kind of put it like that, and maintain that knowledge across all deployments and security across all those deployments as well. This is really, really important as a customer looking for a innovative cloud to run my stuff in, which has like the hyperscale kind of capabilities. This is now kind of, I think, changing the potential view on sovereign cloud being non-innovative to it being a really innovative place for you to develop and deploy your production applications with all of these capabilities.
Exactly.
Pretty cool.
Jeff, would you like to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as Rohan mentioned earlier, we've got the deeper architecture diagram here, and I kind of want to cover a couple things. First, we'll talk about the provider use case and their workflow, and then dig into the tenant workflow. So the provider here on the left will download the vCloud Director extension for Tanzu Mission Control. It's bundled as an ISO image that includes all of the images required to run Tanzu Mission Control, as well as the installation manifests for the services, but it also includes information about the integration with VCD. And this is being shipped as a solution add-on, which is a part of VCD that has been around for a little, I think about a year now. And what that does is it enables the providers to install these solutions, which might deploy runtimes, but deploy all of those other VCD components. And so what we see happening is the solution ISO is being installed. It's deploying Tanzu Mission Control self-managed, but it's also deploying vCloud Director RDEs, global roles, rights bundles, other VCD configuration that providers previously had to do by hand when maybe deploying an appliance. They would deploy the appliance and they would go configure VCD by hand. All of that is done as one solution add-on. Now, Rohan mentioned the solution landing zone. That solution landing zone is a concept that the providers running CSE will be familiar with. They have identified a tenant organization, deployed a VDC in there, and they're using that VDC to run their CSE appliance. We've formalized that idea as the solution landing zone now, where prior to installation, the provider goes in and says, this is my VDC that I want to use for solutions. This is the network that I want to use for solutions. This is the catalog that I want to use for solutions. And so that when they upload the ISO and when they install the ISO, that information is used again to deploy those runtimes. Now, in the case of Tanzu Mission Control, self-managed, that installation happens to go to a CSE cluster, so that during installation, they do pick a cluster to target for that installation. And the images are uploaded to their identified harbor registry. The deployments are then pushed out to CSE, and the Tanzu Mission Control comes up and running, ready for users to log into, because the solution has done all of the other VCD integration as part of that installation process. And so, it's really bringing together a lot of different steps of installation all into one step. There might be, inputs to that. Each solution has its own inputs and things that go in, but all of the VCD configuration is done together. And that means in the future, upgrades will also be done together. And so really driving that value and trying to simplify those install and upgrade operations to the provider. We see here for the first time, the OSE, the object storage extension, as we talked about, could be used to back up and restore that Tanzu Mission Control cluster so that they're backing up their provider side information. We'll talk about it from the tenant side in a moment. But so that once that's installed, it's installed once by the provider into their solution landing zone. They're then able to publish access to, the providers are familiar with publishing a plugin to tenants. They publish this solution to tenants. And so that gives them access to whatever, that'll be different for each solution. In this case, it's giving them access to a couple of standard roles that then allow them to log into TMC. From the tenant user's perspective, they're given either the provider has updated the branding for VCD to include a link out to the TMC UI, or they're given a link to the TMC UI by their provider, and then the tenants access that URL. They see the TMC service site, they click login, and they're taken to the VCD login page because we're reusing the VCD IDPs. VCD manages that login process, and if a user is already logged into VCD, they'll just get bounced right back to TMC. If they're not logged in, they'll go through the login process and go right back to TMC, and we'll show that in a demo here in a moment. But then once they're in TMC, they've got the roles that they've been given by VCD, and they're able to proceed using TMC based on the roles and privileges that they've been given. And so each tenant sees their own view of TMC, but each tenant is reusing that same core single deployment of TMC. It's a multi-tenant deployment so that each tenant has their own view, sharing that one installation. We don't have a box over here for OSE, but as tenants attach and detach or manage their clusters, they can also choose to configure the OSE buckets and endpoints in here for backup and restore as well. And that's what Rohan was saying. It's an optional thing where if they want to do backup and restore, and if they want to use OSE for that, then OSE, we've tested that, we've made sure that it works, and we've got the process for them to take that OSE configuration and drop it into their TMC environment.
It's pretty cool. You can do the backup and restore as well of the provider environment via OSE. I don't think that's been enabled for any other solution add-ons yet.
Right. Yeah, that's driven by the standard OSE functionality to back up and restore clusters. And so it's a nice, reuse of that functionality here without having to, create new workflows for the providers.
And one of the important things here is that TMC is utilizing the solution add-ons UI to extend the Cloud Director offering with all of the value-added functionalities, right? So I think in 10.4.1 we came up with this idea of solution add-on. It is really helping extend the Cloud Director extensibility ecosystem. So I think in future we can use the solution add-on landing zone not just for TMC, but for any databases, APIs, eventing, security. A lot of different things can be used with solution add-on landing zone. So I see solution add-on as really powerful, and over a period of time, I do see it can explode as well based on the capabilities it brings into the table.
Yeah, and just so I'm absolutely clear on this, so from a user experience perspective, a user of VCD who has access to TMC will require accessing TMC UI through a separate window, right? It won't be something that's inclusive in VCD, but the identity and access management all takes place at the back end of the browser side of things. So from an experience of not having to log in twice or remember different login credentials, that's all good. But also from a kind of a usability experience, you are going to have two windows open, which I think in this case is fine because you're going to be doing quite a lot of work in TMC. You're going to be in there for a specific reason.
Right. And
that is right.
Future releases will be driving some more of the integration between the VCD UI and the TMC, capabilities. But all of the features, will be choosing features to implement in the VCD UI. For the bulk of the features will be accessible through the TMC UI, but we'll be driving a little bit more integration between those two, so that you don't necessarily just need to have the URL on hand. You'll have a way to kind of click through to TMC directly from the VCD UI. Based on your access.
I think there's going to be a need for like in context launching to various cluster kind of analytics or policies or whatever it might be to kind of see those things rather than having to then go into TMC and actually find them there.
Right. And then to kind of talk about that login workflow here, we drill down, have a diagram that drills down into that process. So as I mentioned, the first time, when a user comes in, if they go directly to Tanzu Mission Control, they'll come in here. And I think users are familiar with this redirect, the SSO redirect, where I go somewhere, I get sent somewhere else to log in, and then I get sent back. And that's what's happening is I come to Tanzu Mission Control, self-managed. It sees that it doesn't know who I am. So it sends me to VCD. And at VCD, here I log in, and I might have to enter the organization that I'm authenticating to, enter my credentials for that IDP. But then once that login process is complete, I'm sent back to the Tanzu Mission Control website where that login process is done. And we'll be showing a demo, as I mentioned, a demo of this using an external OAuth provider.
Cool. It's pretty seamless.
Yeah, it's nice. I think before we go to the demo, I want to just quickly cover the BOM for the current release. We're calling this our 0.50 release. We have an upcoming 1.0 release, but this is done to get the Tanzu self-managed 1.0.1 release into providers' hands that they can deploy in production. They have a supported upgrade path to future releases. It does require Cloud Director 10.4.2.2, CSE 4.1, and then if you're using Object Storage Extension, it would be 2.2.2. But this is what we've got support for today, and we're bringing more support, more features in the future.
Okay, and just so I'm clear, right, because there was some confusion around CSE 4.1, 4.2. 4.2 is not needed for this at all. It can be 4.1. All right.
Yes, it can be 4.1. The only additional consideration that the providers would have to do is to make sure their 4.1 clusters have the certificates installed. And Jeff, would you like to elaborate on that?
Sure. I think for some of our providers, being able to use self-signed certificates for their image registries, their hardware registries, or for the Tanzu Mission Control services, it's important to have that functionality. And so if you're using self-signed certificates or a self-signed CA to then create all those certificates, some extra considerations are required. We've created a KV article to cover all of those considerations for installation or for upgrading pre-existing clusters. For the providers that are using externally signed certificates for hardware and for Tanzu Mission Control, then there's really going to be no difference for them in the installation process. It's really those providers that are using self-signed certificates.
Got it. Okay, cool.
All right. So as discussed, we find ourselves as the tenant user visiting the Tanzu Mission Control self-managed site. When they first come to this URL, this is the page they'll see, and they'll go ahead and click sign in. Now, with this sign in, they're redirected to the vCloud Director, and here I'll enter the organization name that I'm logging in as. And this organization happens to be configured with an external OAuth identity provider. I'm redirected to that authentic identity provider where I can log in. On successful authentication, the IDP sends me back to TMC, which now has all of my information. But the information from my IDP was sent to VCD. VCD then sends that information to TMC. Nice. This user happens to be a TMC admin user. That means it has full access privileges in the TMC environment. If I go ahead and open up the access management screen, we'll see that I have the ability to configure additional levels of privileges for VCD roles or for individual VCD users. So as I mentioned, by default, TMC admin has all of these privileges, but in this example, I've also given the privileges to users with the organization administrator role, or for a particular user with username @example.com. The email address of users allows the admin to give specific access to at any point in the TMC self-managed access management screen. Here we're seeing policies that apply for the entire organization, but as Rohan mentioned, there are other logical groupings that we have cluster groups or individual clusters. In addition, there are workspaces as a whole, or workspace groups or individual namespaces. And so the individual tenant administrators are able to come in here and configure their access control based on what they need for their platform or for their developer resources. Rohan, do you have anything to add about access management?
Yeah, there are several. I have actually created a few more policies, but before I go into the policies and deep dive, why not we show the cluster group? Let's go and look into the launchpad. Like from the provider perspective and the tenant perspective, I really like this page. And you know, this page is really about how can you get started. It's more as a learning and see what are the different features. So you would see the demo, the concepts and how to plan the organization structure, where can they expand their Kubernetes knowledge, and so on and so forth. So this page would really help them kickstart their journey on Tanzu Mission Control by by looking into the YouTube videos, by having getting more knowledge on Kubernetes, and then looking into the documentation and reading the documentation to be well aware of. So that's the first step for them. The next step really then what Tanzu Mission Control allows you to have a cluster group. So if you look into the cluster group on the left hand side, Jeff, if you can click. So there are two logical constructs. One is the cluster group, and the second is the workspaces that you see just below the clusters. Now, cluster groups, you can group all of the different clusters, be it CSE clusters or be it CSE along with different other provider clusters. It can be any other provider clusters as well that can be grouped, and then all of them can be grouped under a cluster group. Now, the beauty of cluster group is that you can uniformly apply all of the policies to the clusters. So let's go into one of the clusters and then see in a very so there are two actions, as you can see in the clusters. One, you can create a cluster, and then the second is attach a cluster. One of the important considerations at this point for CSE is you can only attach the Kubernetes clusters which has been created through CSE. Create clusters and then doing the lifecycle management of the CSE clusters at this point uh, is not supported, but it is work in progress, I would say.
Okay, so still
Now,
use CSE to do the creation and things like that. Yeah. Right.
perfect. Yes. Now, in terms of attaching the clusters, it is a very simple workflow. We'll go deep into how you can attach and then the clusters later. But really looking into those clusters, once the clusters are attached, and this is a summary view of how you look into the cluster. You see the cluster name, the health status, the readiness of the cluster, the version number, the requested and allocatable. But if you really want to see the complete overview of the cluster, you can click on the cluster and then go inside the cluster, and what you will see is a holistic overview of which cluster group this cluster belongs to, how many nodes does this cluster have, when was this cluster created, and what's the Kubernetes version, how many cores and memory does this cluster have. As you can see over here, just beneath that sample summary is they requested an allocatable CPU and requested an allocatable memory, how much is requested, how much is available. Now, at the same time, you also see the components health of the Kubernetes component health, plus all of the different agents that TMC installs onto a Kubernetes cluster. What's the status of those agents? All of those agents at this point of time, you see green check mark, which means they are healthy, they are good. But there are times when the agents are not, there is an error state. There are times when it can't determine the state of the agents. So you see those information here. But and the other things that you see really in this is the inspection and data protection. Inspection is really your security inspection, where you can run the inspection and see whether the cluster is Kubernetes conformant, or you will get an option to run a CIS benchmark inspection for the cluster as well. That's also, we'll go a bit later. Now, coming to the data protection side, you can enable the data protection for the Kubernetes cluster. Once you enable, what is going to happen is it will install Velero into the Kubernetes clusters. And then you can take backup and perform schedule backups and restores of the Kubernetes clusters. But the more deep you go, the more questions you may ask that how does the backup gets created? Where is the target location? What are the different storage does it support? So currently it supports any S3 compatible storage. It can be an AWS S3 where you have an account. It can be an Azure Blob where you have an account, or any other S3 compatible storage that can be configured. So where is the S3 compatible storage which is configured? That's configured onto the administration section. So if you see on the extreme left-hand side, just second last, you see there is an administration. The first is accounts. So the first thing, as you can see, there is a sample account of npm tmc over here configured. So this is an Azure Blob Storage account which has been configured here. Once you configure the Azure Blob Storage or any S3 compatible storage, the next step would be to create a target location where my cluster backup will go. And the target location, there is a tab for target location. Um, and that's where the target locations can be configured, where the storage can be, where the backup can be done,
Right.
really. So that's the administration part. That's the backup and restore part. So we did talk about the overview, the security
And
inspections, the backup and restore. Yes, Guy, go ahead.
sorry, Rohan, you said that Valero would be automatically deployed to the cluster
That's right. Yes.
instances then. So is that done here as well when you specify the target location and credentials?
For the Valero,
Mm-hmm.
so Valero gets deployed on the cluster. So once Valero gets deployed in the cluster, and then what happens is when you create the target location, you have to specify for which Kubernetes cluster this target location will really work. So if you see the name is Azure Blob, but in the end you see there is a cluster which is attached to it. So Valero will then use this Azure Blob in the Kubernetes cluster to do the backup.
Mm-hmm.
That's how
Got
the
it.
connection is established.
And that Valero is installed to the cluster as soon as you enable data protection for it.
Yes.
So
Got it.
TMC manages that installation for you once you've enabled data protection for that cluster.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I know we are very close to the time. So one very important aspect here is the policies that if you go inside the policy and click on the assignments, then you will see how you can have different policies which can be applied to a fleet of Kubernetes clusters or a fleet of namespaces. The first policy, I believe, would be the security policy. Yes. And see how you have the first part of the security policy is the cluster group. The cluster group is the organization name, which is the org VDC name, is the tenant name is alpha, and default is the cluster group. And under default, we have got like banking and services. I always tend to think about in terms of the cluster as development cluster, production cluster. So think about those are different clusters which are grouped under a default cluster group. Now, so you can apply a security policy here. You can apply a image registry policy, network policy, quota policy. But an example of how that policy would look like would be, I think there is an example on the image registry policy. Yeah. So so you see how the image registry policy can apply only to the workspaces. So yes, and in this there is a policy which says block latest tag. What it really means is all of the latest container images in that trust in those namespaces will be blocked. And how that policy would look like is if you trickle down that arrow sign, Jeff. So
Yeah.
see, it says block latest tag. And then if you also trickle down the default workspace, the container group workspace, maybe let's go into the container group workspace. Yeah, see. So what this means is that there are three different namespaces inside my Kubernetes cluster. There is a team containers, team VCD, team VDP, which means that there are three different teams. And now I have created for these three different teams, I have created a policy so that they can't work with the latest container images. This is just an example. Now, if somebody goes and deploys a container with the latest container images, then what will happen? How do you know that there is a violation? For you to know where is the violation, there is an insights tab where you will see that, oh, somebody has installed a latest or deployed a latest a container image with the latest tag, and that violation will be listed here for you. That's how the policy and the insights of the policy really makes this this view cool.
Okay, so yeah, we're kind of out of time now, but let's I think this is like giving me a really good kind of understanding of some of the organization of TMC and how a provider could organize this for their customers, or how a customer can organize it for themselves. The policies, I can see kind of two use cases for that. One would be a provider laying down policies for tenants to just inherit, and another would be tenants doing their own policies specifically, either one or the other or both. So I think I'd like to come back to this and spend a bit longer going through the kind of the use cases here for a provider and a tenant in more detail.
Sounds good. Yes.
Okay, cool. Guys, thank you very much. This has been a really, really interesting Feature Friday, and there is plenty more kind of to peel back here. But just to summarize then, Tanzu Mission Control, self-managed, is GA. It will provide you with the essential cluster management that you've kind of all been asking for and all been looking for. It could be completely self-isolated, so really works for kind of sovereign or regulated industries that want to keep things off a SaaS platform. The integration today is very much at the identity and access management and roles and permissions levels. You're still going to have to go, do work in Tanzu Mission Control. You're still going to have to do some work in CSE, as we discussed earlier. And there is plenty of functionality here for you to, get to grips with your tenants' estates, or to offer this to your tenants for them to get to grips with their estates and provide, real value to them in terms of the Kubernetes management plane. Anything else to add, Jeff, Rohan?
No, this has
I think
been.
You got it. Thank you for having
Yeah,
us.
you got it. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll have another session in a couple of weeks' time. We'll dive into more detail, give people the opportunity to have a more of a look at it. Gentlemen, thanks for your time today.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.